Good afternoon. There's only one headline today. President John F. Kennedy is dead. President John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was shot to death today by a hidden assassin armed with a high-powered rifle. The 46-year-old president lived about 30 minutes after a sniper cut him down as his limousine left downtown Dallas. Newsmen said the shot that hit him was fired about 12:30 p.m. A hospital announcement said he died at approximately 1 p.m. of a bullet wound in the head. Automatically, the mantle of the presidency fell to Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, a native Texan who had been riding two cars behind the chief executive. Assistant Presidential Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff said Johnson was not hit. The new president previously had been reported wounded. Kennedy died at Parkland Hospital, where his bullet-pierced body had been taken in a frantic effort to save his life. Lying wounded at the same hospital was Governor John Connally of Texas, who was cut down by the same gunfire that ended the life of the youngest man ever to be elected to the presidency. Connally and his wife had been riding with the President and Mrs. Kennedy. The First Lady cradled her dying husband's blood-smeared head in her arms as the presidential limousine raced to the hospital. "Oh no," she kept crying. Connally slumped in his seat beside the President. The Dallas Police Department has arrested 24-year-old Lee H. Oswald in connection with the slaying of a Dallas policeman shortly after President Kennedy was assassinated. He was also being questioned to see if he had any connection with the slaying of the President. Oswald was pulled screaming and yelling from the Texas Theater in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas. He brandished a pistol, which officers took away from him after a scuffle. Police officer M.N. McDonald, who was cut across the face in the scuffle, said Oswald said, "Well, it's all over now." A large crowd had congregated around the theater and witnessed the arrest. Police had to hold the crowds back because many apparently connected the arrested man with the slaying of the president. The officer who was slain, J.D. Tibbet, had been killed by a man answering the description of Oswald in the neighborhood a short time before. Tibbet was slain with a pistol. Police have ordered an unprecedented dragnet of the city, hunting for the assassin. Shortly before Kennedy's death became known, he was administered the last rites of the Roman Catholic Church. He had been the first Roman Catholic president in American history. Even as two clergymen hovered over the fallen president in the hospital emergency room, doctors and nurses administered blood transfusions. The new president, Lyndon Johnson, and his wife left the hospital a half hour later. Newsmen had no opportunity to question them. The horror of the assassination was mirrored in the eyewitness account by Senator Ralph Yarborough, Texas Democrat, who had been riding 3 cars behind Kennedy. "You could tell something awful and tragic had happened," the senator told newsmen before Kennedy's death became known. His voice breaking and his eyes red-rimmed, Yarborough said in these words, "I could see a Secret Service man in the president's car, leaning on the car with his hands in anger, anguish, and despair. I knew that something tragic had happened." Yarborough had counted 3 rifle shots as the presidential limousine left downtown Dallas through a triple underpass. The shots were fired from above, possibly from one of the buildings, or possibly a bridge. One witness, television reporter Mal Couch, said he saw a gun emerge from the upper story of a warehouse, commanding an unobstructed view of the president's car. Kennedy was the first president to be assassinated since William McKinley was shot in 1901. It was the first death of a president in office since Franklin D. Roosevelt died of a cerebral hemorrhage at Warm Springs, Georgia, in 1945. Roosevelt had been enjoying a vacation when he died. McKinley had been shaking hands at a reception at an exposition in Buffalo, New York. Kennedy and his wife had just passed the halfway point in a 3-day speaking tour of Texas. The president already had prepared a luncheon address for a Dallas audience before he died. In his prepared text, he assailed his ultra-conservative critics. Dallas is considered a center of conservative philosophy and finance. In Dallas, on October 24th, Adlai Stevenson was spat upon by one heckler and struck by another after making a United Nations Day address. Kennedy's body is being flown to Washington. Traditionally, funeral services for presidents who die in office are held in the capital city. Kilduff, the Assistant Secretary of News, told newsmen that Governor Connally, a Democrat, was wounded in the right chest in the same ambush that felled the president. Connally was rushed into surgery for a 2-hour emergency operation. Connally was also hit in the right wrist. Although Mrs. Kennedy cried in horror and despair after her husband was shot, she did not collapse or give way to hysteria. When he entered the hospital, her clothing was covered with blood from her husband's wounds. Lieutenant Emmerich Kamensky of the Secret Service said the assassin's weapon appeared to have been a high-powered Army or Japanese rifle of about .25 caliber. The rifle had a scope on it, he said. This rifle was later found in a building. The entire building where the sniper was located was evacuated. People were working in the building at the time of the shooting. Dallas Inspector J.H. Sawyer said police found the remains of a chicken dinner and paper on the 5th floor. Apparently the persons had been there quite a while. After the fatal shots were fired at Kennedy, the stricken president's Secret Service driver raced away from the scene at top speed. They were heading for the nearest hospital and trying to get the presidential party out of range of further gunfire. Kennedy, Connally, and their wives had been riding together in the president's familiar dark blue bubble-top convertible. The transparent plastic roof of the vehicle had been removed for the motorcade. Secret Service agents riding with the president in a second convertible following close behind immediately drew their pistols and automatic weapons, but they were unable to get a shot at the gunman. Dallas motorcycle officers, ringed around the cavalcade, took off across a field in the direction from which the murderer apparently had fired. Ironically, Kennedy was shot to death at a spot where there were few spectators after driving almost within handshaking distance of many thousands. Kennedy's body was removed from Parkland Hospital at 2:05 this afternoon in a lengthy cream-colored ambulance with curtains tightly drawn. Mrs. Kennedy rode in a passenger seat in the ambulance, a type of vehicle with 2 seats for passengers. She and the body were escorted from the emergency entrance of Parkland by 2 motorcycle officers. Mrs. Kennedy walked out of the back door of the emergency entrance as the body also was taken out. She walked slowly, looked around in a dazed manner, and appeared to be in a state of shock. At the university, President Starcher has issued a statement on the president's death. He said in these words, and I quote, "We cannot soon recover from the intimate sense of loss caused by the president's death." President Kennedy spoke at the university September 25th. All university afternoon classes have been adjourned, and the Johnstone Fulton dance have been canceled. The campus, like the nation, is only slowly adjusting to the shock. Good afternoon.